The 2024 Video Game Awards, at least they used to be about video games. Now they're just about celebrities, video game producers that are wannabe celebrities, and cinematic movie games that defraud investors and consumers alike. In my last video, I said what I think everybody now agrees with. It's sensible that the Video Game Awards, at least the ones that Jeff Keighley produces, they are not about integrity and they cannot be trusted. You can't even trust them to give you halfway decent video game announcements anymore. And this is what I predicted. I would say that I'm disappointed. I'm not as disappointed perhaps as in the years past. They did show some things that maybe are interesting a little bit to some people. The jury is still out on things like The Witcher 4 and some of the new games that they've shown off. Okami 2 could be promising, for example. But overall, I'm a little bit more disgusted than I am just disappointed. And I want to zero in on one game announcement in particular, which a lot of us saw coming. It's Naughty Dog's quote-unquote new video game IP. I have to say, I think this is perhaps even more disappointing than if it had been just another Last of Us sequel. Of course, at the same ceremony, they announced that The Last of Us Part 2 remake, or remaster as they call it, is getting a PC port. That's another predictable milking tactic from this company. I think the serious problem here is that, there's one name in particular behind all of this, and it's Neil Druckmann, or as I and a lot of us like to call him, Neil Cuckman, because the guy has been indoctrinated by ideas that have absolutely no business being used to make or sell video games. He's a plague on Naughty Dog. And if you look at the comments on any of the videos from IGN, from Naughty Dog's official page, from Sony, the comments that people are leaving there, as they say, the internet is undefeated. I'm having a laugh looking at a lot of these comments, and I agree. People are pointing out the obvious. I can't wait for the remaster on PlayStation 6, and this looks like another Concord, which is exactly the way that I feel, because they showed nothing of real gameplay. And to Concord's credit, at least Concord had some gameplay, which is why I'll even out myself and say I did at the time make a video called Concord is Credible, because in my opinion, the reason that it had some credibility was that it wasn't a story-driven movie game. At least it was an actual video game. And a lot of people that criticized Concord did not even give it a chance. It certainly was far from perfect, and one of the main issues with Concord is it looked too derivative compared to games like Destiny and other space games. I think space is just such a boring concept for a video game now, unless it's something like Space Marine 2, which is in space, but it has the core tenets of what a traditional video game should be. All right, there's no cutscenes interrupting the gameplay. It just has a good flow to it and good mechanics. So without using too many buzzwords like ESG and DEI and wokeism, all of these things, they probably do apply here for various different reasons. Again, I think Neil Cuckman is at the center of all this. But the real problem is, I will challenge anyone that would defend this reveal trailer to tell me, what do you see in it that shows you any indication that this is going to be an actual playable game? Even just the name, as I was watching it, the embarrassing and predictable name of Intergalactic, whatever the rest of it is, I have thought to myself that they were introducing Christopher Nolan's Interstellar the game with all the generic sci-fi space footage. It could be Concord, it could be Xbox's Starfield. It doesn't look anything distinct, and it certainly doesn't look like a video game. And I want to show you something. I'm not going to show the trailer because, in all honesty, I do fear some kind of copyright claims from Naughty Dog and Sony and people like this that want to try to silence any negative criticism of their products. And I'll tell you something else. I'm actually more disgusted as a Sony investor that this is the money that people like myself, as a consumer and an investor on top of that, we put into Sony, particularly Sony PlayStation, so that they will actually make something that's intriguing to play as a game. And this is what they end up wasting it on, probably to the tune of, I don't have any insider information, but I'm sure hundreds of millions have probably already been put into it over the course of 4 years. This is public information, the development cycle, and of course not counting the money that they wasted on The Last of Us factions. So as an investor, I'm not pleased, but I'm not going to show you any footage. If you've seen it, then you've already been disgusted, I'm sure, as I have, and you probably need something to wash your eyes out with. So I want to show you something in contrast, something from the old days of game design. I want you to look at the promotional material for Devil May Cry 3, one of the greatest games ever made, and I am going to do a retrospective on this in a few months in conjunction with a lot of other games that are going to be turning 20 years old just right around the corner. And there's also Bloodborne that's going to be 10 years old. I'm going to do a video on that as well. But I want you to look at the difference in how video game reveal trailers used to look. It's true that there's always going to be some cinematics involved. You have to have almost always some kind of cinematic, unless it's something like Mario, some platformers. And that's the other thing. The Game Awards gets a lot of flack for these, as Razorfist calls them, the interchangeable indie games. He's right about it. They are all interchangeable, seemingly on the surface. But even some of the indie games that they showed off at least had gameplay footage, like actual real-time action shown off, and we saw nothing of that from Naughty Dog's big reveal that we were all left in suspense for, but not really, because they're predictable at this point. Even though I didn't know they were doing this type of game, and I still don't know exactly what it is. It looks like some generic hack and slash game. But when you look at Devil May Cry, even the cinematics in that game show you what type of game it is. It is a character action game. More specifically, it's a sort of hack and slash action game. And you see that not only in the cinematics, but certainly you see that in the archival, E3 promotional video, which they were wise enough to include in the finished product so people could go back and watch it, because that's what got a lot of people hyped for it, even though it was always a niche game. You can see that there's so many possibilities in the game, and they used to show this kind of stuff off. Even when I think of the God of War reboot in 2018, they didn't show much. They did show, I think, just cinematics initially. But at least they showed off Kratos, and Kratos is such a recognizable face that we had a strong indication of what the game was going to be. Forget about all of the presumptions about how the character looks, and from what I've read, there's nothing unique about the character's name. They sound like a generic NPC, and they look... I just don't understand what's supposed to be appealing about this character. How do we go from Jak and Daxter to this? Because video game characters are supposed to have personality. They're supposed to look like people that we've never seen before. We're supposed to be transported to another world. And I'm sorry, but just throwing us in space is not going to do it. What is more soulless than outer space? It's just an empty void, essentially. There's nothing intriguing about what they've shown off to us. It looks completely soulless, and it's even more ridiculous that they've tried to invoke the name of the past Naughty Dog titles, the true games that they've made, in order to hype up a soulless ESG project by the looks of it, or just a Neil Cuckman project, basically interchangeable. I just don't understand how anyone can defend this. I don't know how Sony could produce this. All of the product placement is, as David Lynch once said, complete and total fucking bullshit, because product placement, it doesn't seem to be something that should mesh with art. If you're trying to do something that's truly artistic, you're not putting the logos of other corporations on your product. You're just trying to sell someone else's idea of advertising. You're not trying to actually promote something that people want to turn off their brain and have some escapism. They showed no gameplay. They showed like a 5-second clip of pre-rendered, like a pre-rendered cutscene transition. Nothing that intrigues me at all. If I had seen this 10 or 15 years ago, maybe I would have the indication that they're trying to do some kind of hack and slash game. Might have been an intriguing idea, but I don't think Naughty Dog is going to reinvent the wheel any more than Stellar Blade did this year. So it looks completely dead on arrival, and it's something that I love and hate to say at the same time, because I miss the old Naughty Dog. Some of my favorite games of all time were from Naughty Dog, back when they had people that were really passionate about making games. And this has happened to a lot of Sony studios. Insomniac Games, of course, sold out when they decided to sell themselves to Sony, and instead of doing original games like Resistance and Ratchet, even though they did do a new Ratchet game a few years ago, but we haven't seen anything truly unique and novel from these game companies since they've sold out to Sony. The only one I can think of is I still think Sucker Punch has something. They have something. They did Ghost of Tsushima, and they're doing some kind of a sequel. Those games aren't going to be perfect, but you can tell, like, when you listen to Nate Fox over there at Sucker Punch, he's worked there all along. And the guy just, he's the greatest pitchman that I've seen in video games because he talks about his games with such enthusiasm. And then you have someone like Neil Cuckman who says that we don't use the word fun when we describe our games. Well, I imagine that we'll just have somebody like Troy Baker come back and tell us again that, those of us that don't like the product, that we're just on some kind of nicotine addiction, that we're just trying to get a reaction. I'm making this video because as I've said, I'm more than qualified as somebody that considers myself to be, I'd like to say, a real video game journalist, someone that actually talks about games and, reviews them for what they are and also what they should be. Someone that actually plays games and has detailed critiques of them. I'm making this video because I really am concerned about Sony and Naughty Dog. This is a multi-billion-dollar company that we're talking about, and even though Sony is a very powerful company, and they're very powerful within the industry, we don't need Sony ending up like Ubisoft. We don't need to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on speculation projects that will not, I imagine, do very well with game testers, let alone the general audience. So I don't know what they're doing in Naughty Dog. They've got to get rid of Neil Druckmann. The ship is going to capsize. You made him the captain of the ship. The ship is going to sink. You got to get this guy out of there. I've been saying it for 10 years, and I'm vindicated. Neil Druckmann, this is a guy that wanted to go and work in the movie industry. Let him go do that. Let him go. He cares more about winning awards for his television adaptations of his video games, which are themselves adaptations of other people's movies. He cares more about those than he does about making games, and that's exemplified by the 5-minute nausea without a single moment of real-time action shown to us. We have to go back to the way video games always were, back when they were really video games. I like some story-driven games, but those are a little bit different. Those are games where you go into it knowing you're going to get a story. At least it's an interesting story. At least it's not made by some ideologue. You look at Metaphor, which was my choice for Game of the Year. It still knows how to be a video game. It still knows how to be a piece of escapism, and all of the mechanics are kind of tied into that. But the Sony movie games, they just don't understand the ratio. Video game designers today, they just don't understand the ratio of gameplay to really anything. They don't even understand, a lot of them, how to do gameplay. I don't want to play something that is a movie interrupted by gameplay. I want to play a game that occasionally has some storytelling. As I've quoted Video Game Donkey in the past. He made a video, I think, about Final Fantasy VII Part 1 remake, where he said that you used to grind the game to get to the story. Now you grind the story to get to the game. And that's exactly what this revealed trailer shows me, that we're going to have to grind some fucking stupid story with pedantic bullshit to get to an actual game that will probably be subpar and nothing original. They used to do very innovative games with Jak and Daxter, with even Uncharted. I still defend Uncharted, and I think that's one of the greatest third-person shooters and one of the most inventive third-person shooters for its time. People want to be revisionists, but the first Uncharted game, I think, although it gets a lot of criticism today, that was a game that put a lot of things together that may have been done before, but not in the way that they were done. Those were at least video games that were enjoyable, and those were games that were engrossing, engaging, and they weren't bogged down by cutscenes. And they've spent Who knows how much money on actors? I think the actress in this game is also appearing in the TV adaptation of The Last of Us or something like that. I might be getting that mixed up. That could be misinformation a little bit, but that's what I read. I don't really care either way. They're spending money on all of the wrong things and on all of the wrong people, and I'm meaning not just the actors. Nothing against the actress, but the people that work on these games. The problem that Concord had was that they went way over budget and they paid for so many excessive programmers or whatever these people were doing. I'm worried as an investor. I think this is a sunk cost and they need to just stop the project. You can see that nobody likes this game. Overwhelming dislike, it seems. Who's going to buy it? Even if they do eventually show gameplay, I think it's going to be too little too late. The concept is just uninteresting. It's been done in some form and fashion before. And this does not look like a Naughty Dog game. They started with platformers, and then even Uncharted, as you remember, Uncharted was an extension of the games that they made in the past. They started with Crash. Jak and Daxter was a platformer series. And they tweaked some elements in the sequels to make it sort of a third-person shooter, sort of like a GTA-esque game, which even at the time, it looked completely unlike anything that had been done, other than maybe GTA 3. But I think it was even better than GTA 3. And then you have Uncharted, which people will say is a Tomb Raider clone, but not really. It did things much better than Tomb Raider, especially as a third-person shooter. It was over the shoulder. It had a cover system. It had shoulder switching. It had a lot of dynamic gameplay. And it incorporated those signature platforming mechanics that Naughty Dog had been building on for a decade before that. What indicates to you that this is a Naughty Dog game other than, again, they're very shamelessly injecting the bygone titles that Neil Druckmann wasn't really even a part of. He didn't have anything to do with Crash. He started working at Naughty Dog at the very end of the Jak and Daxter series, and he was there for Uncharted. Even he made Uncharted 4, so we give him some credit where credit's due. But there was also Bruce Straley who helped direct that. It's getting to be a rant at this point, but I really do not like Naughty Dog. I do not like the direction that Sony first-party studios are going, and I have every right to criticize them as a lifelong Sony gamer and as somebody that invests money in this company. I have no shame in saying that this is not a good look for Sony, and they might survive this. I imagine they will. They'll make money elsewhere, but they wasted so much money on Concord. I hate to see them make the same mistake twice.